Welcome to the Deep Dive. We cut through the noise to get you the real story. And today, we've got a real head-scratcher. A major U.S. court, the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, just ruled some of the president's tariffs are unlawful.
Yeah, it's big news. But here's the kicker, the really strange part you need to get right away. These exact tariffs, the ones the court just called unlawful, they're still in effect. For now, anyway.
Unlawful, but still being collected.
Exactly. It's got everyone confused. Businesses, lawyers, economists.
Okay, so that's what we're digging into today, our mission. Unpack this whole thing. We'll get into the court's thinking, the legal stuff. Then what does this actually mean for businesses, for trade, maybe even for you, and of course the politics? What does it mean for the administration, and what happens next legally? Let's set the scene first. Okay, so who exactly is fighting this out in court? It sounds like a pretty big group challenging these tariffs.
Oh, it absolutely is. The case itself is VOS Selections, Inc. versus Donald J. Trump. And yeah, the plaintiffs, the ones suing, it's quite a coalition. You've got businesses, like actual companies involved in importing and selling stuff. Yeah. VOS Selections, Fish USA, Plastic Services and Products, Micro Kits, even a cycling company, Terry Precision Cycling.
Huh. So a real mix of industries.
Right. But what really adds weight, I think, is the states. A whole bunch of U.S. states jumped in.
Which states are we talking about?
Let's see. Oregon, Arizona, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maine, Minnesota, Nevada, New Mexico, New York, Vermont. Quite the list.
Wow, yeah. Why is that so important, having states join in like that? What does it signal?
Well, it shows this isn't just, a few companies complaining. When states get involved, it means they see a much broader impact on their economies, on their people. It kind of elevates it, makes it a matter of significant public interest, not just a private fight.
Makes sense. And who are they actually suing?
They're going right to the top. Donald Trump, in his official role as president, the executive office of the president itself, and other key trade people, like the head of Customs and Border Protection, the U.S. Trade Representative.
So a direct challenge to the executive branch's power here.
No question.
And this ruling we're talking about,
yeah,
it came down when? August 29th, 2025.
That's right, from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. And it's important to remember this was an appeal. There was already a ruling before this from the Court of International Trade.
Got it. So which specific tariffs are we actually focused on here, the ones deemed unlawful?
Yeah, the court zeroed in on what they called the reciprocal and trafficking tariffs.
Oh.
These came about after a national emergency was declared back on February 1st, 2025.
An emergency about?
Officially, it was about the sustained influx of illicit opioids and other drugs. But crucially, they expanded that. They broadened the scope to include threats, as they saw them, from Canada and China. And that's how their products got hit with these tariffs.
Right, I remember hearing about those. Weren't they pretty significant, especially for Canada and Mexico?
They were definitely substantial. Canadian Energy and Resources, for instance, got hit with a 10% ad valorem rate. That's, 10% on the value.
Ouch.
Yeah. And there was a slight delay at first for Canada and Mexico, pushing enforcement from early Feb to early March 2025. But then most of these specific reciprocal tariffs, the non-China ones anyway, they actually started being collected on August 7th, 2025.
Okay, so they were already in place. Businesses were already paying them just a few weeks before this court ruling dropped on August 29th.
Exactly, which adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
All right, so the big question then, why? Why did the appeals court say these specific tariffs were unlawful? What's the legal bedrock here?
Well, the core of it really was about executive power, or rather, executive overreach, as the court saw it. They basically questioned if the president has the power to just, tax a huge bunch of the American economy based on, pretty general laws.
So it wasn't about whether tariffs are good or bad policy.
Not at all.
It was about who gets to decide to impose them, who holds the power.
Precisely. It's about the Constitution. And this brings up a really important legal idea called the Major Questions Doctrine.
Okay, Major Questions Doctrine. Break that down for us.
Sure. The court described these tariffs as unheralded and transformative. Those weren't just random adjectives, they were key to using this doctrine. Basically, it says if an executive agency or the president makes a really huge decision, one with massive economic and political impact, something that really changes the existing rules.
Like imposing massive new taxes on trade.
Exactly like that. Then you need really clear permission from Congress, explicit delegation, the lawyers call it. You can't just sort of infer that power from general emergency laws for something this big, this transformative.
So the bigger the decision, the clearer the green light needs to be from Congress.
That's the gist of it. It goes back to a fundamental principle, the power of the purse. The Constitution is pretty clear that taxing power belongs to Congress. James Madison wrote about it way back in the Federalist Papers.
Right, Congress holds the purse strings.
Yeah, he said Congress alone has access to the pockets of the people. The court basically said, look, Congress didn't clearly hand over this specific kind of broad taxing power to the president in the emergency law they used.
Which was the IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act.
Correct. The IEPA gives presidents certain emergency powers, sure, but the court majority felt it wasn't a blank check to impose these kinds of sweeping tariffs across the board. Even the dissenting judges noted Congress didn't unambiguously delegate its taxing power in IEPA, though they disagreed on the outcome.
Okay, that makes the unlawful part much clearer. But then we get back to the paradox. There's still an effect. Why didn't the court just say, stop collecting these immediately?
Yeah, that's the confusing part for a lot of people. The court's decision wasn't just a simple yes or no. The official ruling was affirmed in part, vacated in part, and remanded in part.
Okay, sounds complicated. What does that actually mean in plain English?
It means they agreed with some parts of the lower court's decision, affirmed, overturned other parts, vacated, and crucially, sent some parts back down, remanded, to the lower court, the Court of International Trade, for more work.
So remanded means it's not over. It goes back for another round.
Exactly. They need to re-examine certain things based on what the appeals court just decided. This whole process basically keeps the legal gears turning.
So it wasn't a final stop everything kind of order.
No. And remember the timing we talked about? The non-China tariffs were already being collected since August 7th.
Yeah.
The court's written opinion, the actual document, it doesn't contain an explicit order like an injunction saying halt collections now.
Leaving everything in this weird legal limbo.
Pretty much. Unlawful but not stopped. At least not yet.
Wow. This has got to be causing chaos for businesses, right? What are the ripple effects economically?
Oh, absolutely. Think about U.S. companies importing stuff from Canada, especially things like energy, lumber, resources, or from Mexico. They're now paying tariffs that a major court says are illegal, but the bill is still due. It creates massive uncertainty.
How do you even plan around that?
It's incredibly difficult. Do you budget for the tariff? Do you assume you'll get a refund later? What if you don't? It messes up supply chains, investment plans, cash flow. Imagine you run a small business relying on Canadian supplies. This throws your whole model into question almost overnight.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare. Does this specific ruling affect the president's bigger trade plans too?
It definitely could. It casts a shadow over the whole strategy of using tariffs unilaterally based on these emergency powers. Remember back in April 2025, there was talk of tariffs on goods from lots of countries at levels not seen since World War II. This ruling puts a big legal question mark over whether the executive branch can actually do that without much clearer authorization from Congress. It potentially impacts global trade stability, could cause jitters in financial markets because the legal foundation seems shaky now.
That transformative word the court used seems key here. They saw this as a fundamental shift.
Definitely. The scale was just so large, the potential impact so broad, that it couldn't be treated as just routine executive action.
Okay, beyond the money and the markets, what about the politics? This feels like a significant check on the president's power.
It absolutely is. This ruling hits right at the heart of President Trump's second-term agenda, which really kicked off in January 2025. A big part of that agenda, the America First approach, has relied heavily on using tariffs aggressively.
Like the 25% threats against Canada and Mexico back in January, which then happened in March.
Exactly. Those are prime examples. This court decision basically says, hold on, there are limits. Even emergency powers aren't unlimited, especially when you get into territory that looks a lot like taxing, which is Congress's job.
So it's not just about these tariffs. It's potentially a roadblock for future ones, too.
Yeah.
It challenges the whole unilateral approach.
That's the implication, yes. It sends a strong signal from the judicial branch. It might force the administration to rethink its strategy. Maybe they'll need to go to Congress first and get explicit laws passed for new tariffs.
Or maybe narrow the scope of what they call a national emergency.
Possibly. They'll need to find ways to act that are less likely to trigger this kind of major questions challenge if they want to avoid more courtroom battles like this one. It reinforces that separation of powers idea.
This definitely doesn't sound like the end of the story. Where does it go from here legally? What are the next moves?
Well, the most obvious next step is likely an appeal. The administration, the defendants in the case, can ask the U.S. Supreme Court to review this decision by the Court of Appeals.
They'd file for, what's it called, certiorari?
Right, a writ of certiorari, basically asking the Supreme Court, hey, will you take a look at this?
And is the Supreme Court likely to take it? Does the split decision in the appeals court matter?
It could. The fact that it wasn't a unanimous decision down below, remember, 4 judges dissented, sometimes signals to the Supreme Court that there's a really substantial legal issue at play, maybe disagreement among lower courts, that needs resolving at the highest level.
So the dissent actually strengthens the case for the Supreme Court hearing it.
It can, yeah. It highlights the legal complexity and the high stakes involved. It tells the Supreme Court, look, even experienced federal judges disagree strongly on this.
And what about the part that got sent back down, the remanded bit?
Right. That means parts of the case go back to the Court of International Trade. They'll have to reconsider certain aspects, maybe specific facts, or how the law applies to certain details, but now using the guidance and the legal standards set by the appeals court.
So more legal proceedings, potentially for quite a while.
Oh, almost certainly. This legal fight is likely far from over. It keeps the tariffs and the whole question of presidential power versus Congress very much alive.
It's really quite something. A major court says these tariffs are unlawful, but they're still being collected. It perfectly captures this tension, doesn't it? Between the president wanting to act and the courts and Congress pushing back on how that power is used, especially when it comes to money.
It really does. It's a classic example of checks and balances in action. It might be slow, it might be messy, but the judiciary is clearly staking out its role in defining the limits of executive power, particularly around that core constitutional power of Congress to tax.
So it leaves us with this really fundamental question about trade policy, about the separation of powers.
Right.
How does this tug of war between the White House and the courts actually shape global trade? How does it impact the economic stability that, affects all of us?
Right.
And maybe more broadly, what does it say about how any administration can, or maybe can't, impose its will economically without very clear backing from the legislative branch? It's a dynamic we're going to be watching for a long time, I think. What's your final thought on this?
Just that it underscores how foundational these constitutional principles are. Even in a fast-moving global economy, the basic questions of who holds which power, Congress's purse, the president's emergency authority still drive major conflicts and have huge real-world consequences. It's not just abstract legal theory.